sheets of paper. They can use front and back, and you can always add if they run out in between. All right, so things to find out about your classroom. Do you have a drying rack? Where are you going to put your 20 pieces of wet artwork at the end? Do you have a sink available, or do you need to bring in buckets for kids to hand wash or wipes? Do they go to the restroom to wash their hands? How do they, just little things that you want to find out logistically. Where is the project stored when it's done? Like, do you have to create portfolios? Do you have a bin? A lot of classrooms just have you might have a bin, something like this, where all the art for the whole year just gets stored. It gets displayed in the classroom or at the library or in the art show, and then at the end, each student will have a portfolio and they'll take home their packet of projects. What else? So, yeah, how do you get volunteers in your classroom? That's another challenge, So is it the room parent? Is it the teacher? Is it the lead docent? How do you solicit help in your classroom? Luckily for the fourth graders, you don't really need a lot of help. They're a little more independent. There's a few lessons where I would suggest having more, and I'll kind of go through that as we talk about each lesson. But one or two helpers is usually plenty. It's a lot different from your kinder and first graders. Mostly for cleanup, spills, and that kind of thing. All right, so if you're ready to start your first lesson, our first project is Salvador Dali. So this initial page, and you guys are probably really familiar with this, the overview. As you scroll down, you'll see the video that takes you through the discussion, the sketch, and the project, the whole process that the kids are going to go through. Some people like to, and I've heard some people play the video for their class instead of having a live discussion. They weren't really intended for that. They were intended more for the parents to use or the volunteers to use as a study tool. But certainly if, that's something that you're more comfortable with. I find it's much more engaging to talk to the kids, and you can kind of go with what they're interested in. You can, the video gives you a lot more information than really the kids are going to have the attention span necessarily for. But some people like to use it just for the sketch or the project. So if you don't feel comfortable, like, I can't draw at all, and how am I going to show the kids this project? You can skip to that section and just show them the project in the video if you feel more comfortable doing that. Just find out what you have in your classroom to work with. Do you have a projector? Do you have access to the website in your classroom, so that if you want to use that as a tool. Some things are a little bit newer, and you've probably been on here for a while, but you might not have used these before. One is called the teaching notes. This is probably my favorite thing that they've added on the website. It's really like a summary or cliff note version of the whole project. So just a few key concepts, a little bit about the artist, and it just is like something that you can print out, hold in your hand as you're leading the discussion. If you blank out and you forget what you're going to say, it's just something that you can refer to as you're talking. So this is something I just printed out, put it in the box with the lesson, and then it's always available. Another fairly new part of the website is this, and I haven't used this much personally, it's called Reflections. At the end of the lesson, if you have time, and I rarely have time to do this, but it's nice to kind of recap with your kids about what they liked about the project, point out maybe some projects that kids did where you see examples of some of the key concepts. This is kind of taking that a little bit further and doing it in a written form. So if you wanted to hand these out at the end of the lesson, it just lets the kids give a few words about what they liked, what they would change, what they would do differently. Some people use it in the classroom, so they might give it to the teacher for the next day and have it as a writing prompt so the kids can, or even right after the project, the kids can recap what they did. So this is a new tool. Downloads and resources are going to give you all of the handouts, the key concepts. Morning. Anything, that's okay. Anything that you'll get it in your packet if you buy the supplies through Art in Action. You'll get copies of these, but if you don't, some schools don't buy their supplies through Art in Action, this is where you can print those handouts. Also, labels for each project with the artist's name pre-printed in there. There's editable versions, so if you have somebody who can't come into the classroom but really wants to help out, this would be a great thing for them to do at home. You can give them a list of all the names in the class. They can just enter it in for each project, and then you print it out and you just have it on hand. Some people like to use these as the name for each child on their project. Some people just have the kids write their name and use these just for art shows or when you're displaying the project. So it's up to you, whatever you choose to do. That's on there. All right, let's go back to the overview. And then there's also this artist biography section. This will give you a little more information about the artist. You're not going to necessarily tell the kids every single detail, but you can read up on it, figure out some interesting things about the artist that you want to talk about. This here
Salvador Dali
also gives you the pronunciation of the artist's name, which is very helpful for many of these. It's tough to pronounce some of these. And then if you ever want to go any further into looking into this artist's work, there's a lot of links that you can go to get more information. You can just study up on that. All right. So let's talk about our first project. We're going to be doing some of the projects hands-on. Some I'll just show. Some will do part of the project and not the whole thing, and I'll talk about the rest of it. If you wanted to get an apron, there's some right out in the hallway there. We're not going to be, paint flying or anything, but we are going to be doing a few hands-on. There's also restrooms halfway down the hall, coffee and water in the kitchen. So at any point, if you guys need to get up, take a call, or whatever you need to do, just please feel free. All right, so this is a painting by Salvador Dali, and I like to always bring a photo of Dali too, because his personality was so much reflected in his artwork. He had this long mustache and he would shape it into crazy shapes, and he would do things like walk around with an ocelot. He would deliver lectures in a deep sea diving suit. I mean, he was quite a character. He did a lot of things other than painting. He was involved in fashion design, jewelry design, theater, did collaborations with Walt Disney. So he was quite the character, and he was fairly contemporary, enough so that there's footage of him with Johnny Carson being interviewed on his show. So it's really interesting to kind of go back and see him do his interviews. But this is one of his paintings. It's probably not his most well known. I try to bring in, if you have the ability to show kids the melting clocks. Persistence of Memory is one of his most famous ones with the melting clocks, but a lot of times kids will recognize this imagery and associate it with Salvador Dali. So if you guys want to be my fourth grade class, what do you think about this painting? What do you see? What do you notice? I know it's hard to see in the back. I'll kind of walk. Okay. Yeah. So you can it's not totally clear what they are, but everybody might have their own interpretation. A mirror. Okay, a mirror down here in the water. Do you notice what's being reflected?
Yeah, like the swan becomes an elephant. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you can see that from all angles. Yeah, a lot of curving lines, which you can really see here in these swans' necks. And as you pointed out, the swans, when you look in the reflection, the swans become elephants. So the name of the painting is Swans Reflecting Elephants. I usually don't tell the kids that right off the bat. I'll let them kind of, look at it and figure it out and tell me what they see. But in this one, you can see the swan neck here is in a profile or sideways view. And then the reflections of the trees are what becomes the elephant's legs. So it's really kind of an interesting illusion. Do you feel like this is a realistic painting? Most people are saying no, but there are things that are realistic, right? So what can we point out that's realistic? The moon, some of the scenery. We've got this man standing here. He's pretty realistic, looking out at who knows what off in the distance. Yeah, so there's a lot of details that are realistic, but it's combined in sort of a fantasy or dreamlike setting, and Dali would often say he was inspired by dreams. So this style of artwork became known as Surrealism. So it's combining realistic elements in a dreamlike or fantasy setting. So it does have a lot of realistic elements. Even the elephants look very realistic, a lot of the details, but the scale is not realistic. They wouldn't be the same size as the swans. They're lower on the painting, so traditionally those things would be bigger because they would be closer to us, but they're actually not quite in scale. And then we can kind of see this line right here. Who remembers what that line? Horizon line. Yes, the kids will all remember. They'll be very excited. Horizon line. And how do we know that we're looking off kind of in the distance? Yeah, less detail. The boats are very small in comparison, so the things that are further away get smaller. Less detail. It's not as clear. It kind of gets this misty sort of lighter look in the distance. So as we're looking off, the particles in the air might be obscuring our view a little bit. We noticed the rounded contour lines. Anyone know what this is right here? Can you tell? A snake or something? That sounds about right. I don't know exactly what it is. But it's some sort of a fantasy animal of some sort. So it could be a combination of animals that are combined together. Sort of like a squid, a snake, an octopus, who knows. But a term for an animal that's a combination or fantasy animal sometimes would be called a chimera. So you can talk to kids about if they've heard of any fantasy animals. Maybe they've read Percy Jackson or Harry Potter. There's a lot of examples they might come up with, a centaur or a griffin or, a lot of different animals that they can think of. And what about the mood of this painting? What do you feel is not calm? Okay. If you feel like it's not calm, what gives you that feeling? Dark and edgy. Is it the colors that give you that sense? Yeah.
The vibrant colors, the opposite colors.
Opposite colors. Good one. Do you remember? Anyone remember what opposite colors on the color wheel? Yes, complementary colors. Yes, so we are going back to concepts that they've learned. We've talked about complementary colors for a while, and so we've got a lot of the blues and sort of this orangey brown, creating a lot of contrast.
This picture kind of like opposite. The blue color and the dark color make you feel a little calm.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, the twist of the lines,
Mm-hmm.
you feel like he's kind of like anxious about something.
Okay, good. Yeah, good. So there's definitely a lot of ways an artist can create mood, not just through color, but through the lines. Definitely. Good. So the kids in this project are going to be creating their own fantasy animal or chimera. So it's a really fun project, and it comes in a couple of parts. So I'll show you the first part. They're going to be doing in their sketchbook is just coming up with ideas of different animals that they can draw. So they'll have a handout of animal pictures, but it's always nice too if you have books or photos of animals to bring in some things that they can look at. Yeah, there's a couple examples right there of different ones that they've come up with. And you can go back to reminding them if they don't know, if they're stuck on how to draw an animal. The last lesson, if they did the third grade program, was drawing the horse in the geometric shapes. So this is a good one to kind of bring back to. If you're stuck on how to draw an animal, just think about breaking it down into geometric shapes, right? So if I'm thinking I'm going to draw a turtle, well, okay, it's basically a semicircle. If I want to draw a giraffe and I'm not sure how, I can start with a big triangle and maybe a small triangle for the head. So it's really just geometric shapes that they can break it down into. It really will be the starting point for whatever animal they're going to draw. And then they can draw the contour line or outline and just start shaping their animal. So I am not an artist by any means, but well, and you certainly don't have to be. And it, you know, the kids are going to be the ones doing the creative drawing. So you don't feel like, if you're not an artist, that you can't demonstrate. All right, so here's my sketch. Then what they're going to do is they're going to get a sheet of white. I'm sketching with a Sharpie just so you guys can see it, but they'll be using their sketch pencil. They're going to, once they've got their final design, is get their final paper. They can start with their sketch pencil if they want to, but I would encourage them just to sketch very, very lightly. Their final project is going to be in the oil pastels. This was the cover of the oil pastels. That's what that box looks like. So you guys are going to be doing this project. The first sheet of paper in a pile on your table should be a white sheet like this. And you can turn it either landscape or portrait, whatever works best for the animal that you're going to be creating. You can sketch with your sketch pencil lightly if you want, or you can start right away with your oil pastels. Since this is the first lesson of the year, you might check your oil pastels before you just hand them out. I find mine tend to become concentrated with certain colors. So especially this one, we're going to be going back and telling the kids to do their magic white details. So if you hand out all your oil pastels and none of them have a white, then you're going to be scrambling the morning of to try to find white oil pastels. All right, so think about your animal, and they're going to want to make it fairly large. So if I'm going to do the same thing, I'm going to start out with my giraffe. And they're going to color in their animal nice and dark. And you want it to be colored heavily because they're also going to be using that scratch back, this graffito technique. So if they color, say, more than one color on top, they can use their fingers to blend. And then they're also going to get a craft pick where they can scratch out details or texture into their animals. Now, as I'm demonstrating, I don't necessarily want to spend all my time coloring an entire picture, but I do want to show the kids where they're headed when the final project. So a lot of times I will kind of cheat, like I'll do this much as my demonstration for the kids so they know how hard to color, they know what the scratch back looks like, but I might have one sort of a little more done. Whoops. And they can, it's easy to see where I would go from here, to here. It's not like I've taken a giant leap, but I've just really finished the coloring process so that I'm not just sitting there coloring while they're watching. And to that point, everybody has a different amount of time that they spend, but this is sort of how I break down my time. So the discussion would be 10 to 15 minutes. Fourth grade, they usually can pay attention for a little longer. You can go into a little more detail. Demo and sketch about 5 minutes. The main bulk of their time is going to be on the project, so 30 to 40 minutes. If you have time for reflection and or cleanup, like 5 to 10 minutes. So, just work with the amount of time that you have and see what you can do. But you can see on this one, like if I wanted to scratch down to that bottom color, you can start seeing some of the lower oil pastel color come through. All right, so then they're going to also put in a horizon line. So my horizon line might, in this case, maybe I want mountains. And they can think about some fantasy landscape details, something that seems out of place maybe for this character. It could be like puffy trees or something that you wouldn't find where this animal would normally be. Maybe it's a volcano. Like I said, encourage them to do some magic white details because they are going to be doing a watercolor wash on top of this. So when they've got their piece fairly colored in, and you guys can do your character on your white. So I'll let you guys get started on that. And then we'll do the wash. If you need any additional paint or some at any point or materials, just raise your hand and let me know. If you need inspiration, so you can look at any of these. Is it you get stuck? Yeah, and the kids will have that problem too. So sometimes they can refer to, they'll have this at their tables, they can refer to the handouts of different animals that they can draw. Some people don't like to put a sample out because they feel like all the kids are going to copy it. Well, I always like to give them an idea. So sometimes kids are just stuck and they just need a starting point. And if they have to copy it, then they copy it. At least they're doing the project, they're getting the experience, and it's not going to look the same as, as the sample. And maybe you have an older sibling who can do a sample for you, or a lot of times there'll be samples existing at the school of kids that have done them in the past. You can put up a few different ones. So if somebody, wants to do maybe a cat head and a turtle body, or they can combine so it doesn't exactly look like one particular sample.
I just did this project, and some of the kids did. I mean, they were all really creative. Some of the images looked like Pokemons.
Yeah.
Like the corner guy.
Yeah. No, the kids tend to really like this project. I think they get to just be really creative, and they say, "Oh, this looks weird." And I say, "Well, if it looks weird, you're doing it right," because that's what Dali's artwork really kind of looks like. So.
And they really got it. They're like, "This is my dream. This is my dream."
Yeah, that's what their creation. All right. So and you can keep working on yours, and I'll show you the watercolor wash. What they're going to be doing is a graded wash. So they did this a little bit in 3rd grade, but we'll go back and we'll revisit. Remember, your watercolor brush is the one that has the softer bristles. It looks like this. You might have a larger wash brush at your school, which might look something like this. Now, with watercolor, it's helpful to put a couple drops of water, just dribble a couple drops into the colors that you want to work with before you get started, just to kind of soften them up and get them going. I find with kids, even in 4th grade, the 4th and 5th graders still have the issue of not putting enough water in their watercolors. So they'll wet their brush and they'll put it right in this color, and they'll start like digging in and trying to get enough color, especially when they're using paper that's this large. They really need to add a lot of water, because they want to cover the whole thing, basically, from the horizon line and up. They're going to do one color of a graded wash, and then from the horizon line down, they're going to do a second color. So just remind them that they want to take their color, whatever color they're going to use, mix it in the lid with a lot of water. So when they think they have enough water, then add a little more water, because they're going to really need to fill that page. So to do a graded wash, what they're going to do is start with the color that they've mixed in their lid at basically full strength. So they're going to go across, long strokes, and it will start dark at the top. Now, when you get a few passes with that color, then the next, you're going to add just water and then your color. So you're going to lighten up your color a little bit as you go. And it's going to gradually get lighter and lighter as you get towards the horizon line. And they can see how their magic white object starts to pop out a little bit. you have larger wash brushes, this process will go a little bit faster and easier, but if you don't, it still works, it's fine. By the time I get to my horizon line, my color is going to be very, very diluted, almost clear. And that's what's going to give you kind of that same sense of distance as we saw in the example. All right, so when they've got the top to the horizon line, then they can flip their paper over, choose a second color, and do the same thing from the bottom into the middle. Some kids might want to, and you can see even an example up here, like this one was an underwater scene. Sometimes they might do an animal in space. And if they want to do that and they don't want to draw a horizon line, that's fine too. Just let them be creative and do their vision. All right. So that's kind of the process on that one. Here's one that's completed. Oh, even this one, a little more completed. So you can kind of see some different ideas. This is kind of that one that had started, sort of a completed version of that. And then the last step for this, the kids can come up with a title for their animal. If they want to call it something special, I don't make them do it, but if they want to, they can choose. I'll have a bunch of these strips cut. They can choose a color that goes with their piece. They can write the title of their animal, if they're, turtle, giraffe, a flamingo, something, and then you can attach that on. It's a good time to just put the little label right on here. If you glue this on, then it's like framed and ready to go. You're done, and they have their title. But it is cute to see what they come up with for their titles and their names. Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's a great question. Yeah, so everybody has a different style, so I always present the whole lesson and then give them reminders as I'm walking around. So as maybe they're working in their sketchbook, if I'm picking up their sketchbook, I'll say, remember, put your name on the back of your white paper and start drawing your animal with your oil pastels. So as I'm walking around the room, okay, if you're finished coloring your animal, put in your horizon line and your landscape. It's up to you how you want. I've seen people do it step by step very successfully, but I find once they get going, it's hard to get their attention back. You spend a lot of time like, okay, everybody, or next thing, and then so they all work at such different paces that I find it's just best to kind of let them go and then give them reminders as needed. There is an exception with the next project that we're going to talk about, and I do one part of it step by step, and I'll tell you the reason why on that. But yeah, so I don't know if you found that successful. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically everything that I just showed you is what I would do for the class. And they wouldn't be working necessarily at the same time. So at this point, when I've done my watercolor, I would say, okay, everybody go on back to your desks and get started with your sketchbook. So I would have done all this and then release them to go to their table. Yeah. So the 10 to 15 minutes would be the discussion, the demonstration about 5 minutes. So that's why I said I kind of will cheat. So if I were to sit there and color this whole thing, that would take me a lot more than 5 minutes. I'll show them a little bit. I'll switch to my one that's like almost done. Yeah, and then show them the watercolor. And you can even put these up, so that they'll know, oh, okay, I'm coloring here, and then I'm watercoloring here, and so they see this step by step. How did your lesson go overall? Did you find? Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
I'm a very small
Demonstrator.
demonstrator, so I figured I would show
Uh-huh.
Dempsey.
on that.
I just did something crazy.
But ours wasn't configured, so I had to have somebody come and.
Yeah, well, it's your first one, so, you know, I'm sure the kids
Yeah.
still enjoyed it
Yeah,
and had a great time.
They did. I just wish I had a little bit more time to talk about all the other concepts.
I know, there's always
Yeah.
a lot to talk about, especially when the kids are really involved. You hate to cut them off.
Yeah.
But, you know, they do want to do the project, and that's really the fun part of it. So, you know, as long as you're getting kind of your key concepts in, and that's what you're covering, all of the things that they're learning as far as the lesson part of it gets repeated many times throughout the program. So you don't have to, I didn't cover complementary colors, they're never going to learn that. You know, they'll get it again and again. So, you know, you just have to do the best you can to get it in. Another thing that I will sometimes do, and to that point of, do you teach the lesson step by step or do you do the whole thing? Sometimes I will just write out all the steps. And then I'll just put that up in the classroom. I still will talk about it, demonstrate the whole thing, but then I'll tape this up somewhere in the classroom so that at some point if they forget, what was I supposed to do next, you just have it. If you have a whiteboard, you can also just write it on a whiteboard, and then the next person, if you save this in your bin, the next person will be really happy because it's already done for them. All right, so that is that lesson. As we're talking about watercolors, so you're going to end up with these watercolor pans that have a lot of watercolor in the lid. What you don't want to happen is for the kids to just close the watercolor and have all the yeah. So what you want to do is they can bring this to the sink. If you have a sink or a bucket, this part of the watercolor comes out.
Yeah.
So you can just rinse this part out, dry it. You don't want to put this under the water because all the watercolor will wash away. But what happens is these, if you get your watercolors through Art in Action or almost any watercolor, the individual pans pop out. So you can just refill if you go through one color or two color quickly. Yeah, it takes a while to wash these out, but you can just, as long as you store them flat, you don't have to let them dry. You can close them up as they're wet and they just will dry and be reusable. Any more questions on that one? Is that one? Any other tips that you guys have taught this class?
I wish I had taken this before.
We'll see. You know, you come to the first one next time. No, it's all right. No worries. We've all been there. All right. So keep working. If you haven't finished, feel free to keep working on your project. This next one is by an artist named George Bellows. Let me pull this up here. This is one of my favorite projects for the fourth grade program, although I teach it at the end. I don't teach it as the second one because, and you'll see why, it's three-dimensional, so it's a hard one to store. So if you don't have a lot of storage, you can't really store it flat. So I teach it as either my second to last or last lesson. So just kind of be aware if you're going through the order that you can switch the order up, whatever works for you. Some you might want to tie into a particular curriculum event that's happening in the classroom, and some just might be for practical purposes that you do it at a different time. Someone gave me this book. It's got this particular painting on the cover. It's really interesting about George Bellows' life. But he was also an athlete. He was a baseball player, was very a big fan of boxing. And at the time, boxing was prohibited for many years, and this was one of the first matches when boxing became legal, I guess, again. It was Dempsey versus Firpo, and there's actual black and white footage of this fight online that you can pull up. I've showed it in class before, and you can see the actual moment when he's falling out of the ring. So it's pretty interesting if you are able to show this in your classroom. One time I tried to show it, and the video was blocked, I guess, because but if you find out, you go ahead in advance and can get access. It's pretty interesting for the kids to see. So this was a real match that happened, and what I like to ask the kids is, who do you think won this fight? This is Jack Dempsey, who was the heavyweight champion at the time, and this was Luis Firpo, I believe is his name. So we've got Dempsey falling out of the ring, and a lot of the kids will say, they feel like this guy was the winner, but actually he came back and won the fight. But this person right here is George Bellows. So he painted himself in the crowd as a spectator, and he was actually at the fight. I don't think he was right here, but he painted himself as a spectator in the fight. So what gives you, if you thought this guy was the winner, what gives you that impression? The way he's standing, he has a very commanding presence. Yeah.
The guy who fell down, and then all the guys who around him.
Uh-huh.
It's not like cheer up. Oh, he's the winner. So from the expression of all those guys.
The spectators. Yeah. And actually, it's like he's counting him down or something. Yeah. So there's a lot of clues that would lead you to assume that Firpo won the fight, but actually Dempsey came back. And I think that these guys are like pushing him back up into the ring, right? So there's a lot of action happening in this painting. What gives you the sense that there's action? Okay, the gestures, yeah. And what about the lines? The angles, yes, the angled lines, diagonal lines give you that sense of movement. As we talked about in a lot of lessons, if you have vertical or horizontal lines, it conveys a sense of stillness. Diagonal lines, we see it reflected even in the ropes, in the lines in their bodies.
Light reflection.
The light, yeah, it's very dramatic lighting, right? You've got these guys under the spotlights and highlights. You can even see kind of the spotlights shining back here. So it looks like the artist has really kind of emphasized their body, muscular bodies, and the shadows and highlights in their figures. Gives you that sense of power and action. All right, so this one is a sculpting project, and it's a 3-dimensional project. There is a fairly recent handout that's updated. It's the same one we used for one of the first grade projects, but if you have handouts that have been existing in your classroom, you might just double check that you have the current one, because this is fairly new. It's just showing figures in action poses, basically, and so how the lines of their body are going to look. So the kids are going to think about a sport or an activity that they like, anything that they want to choose, and they're going to practice in their sketchbook drawing figures and action poses. Right, so just think about how the arms might be posed. Maybe this one's jumping rope. Whoops, that knee was kind of weird. Okay, so just the diagonal lines of a body, any activity or sport that they might think of. And then they're going to be sculpting a figure out of wire. So you're going to practice this right along with me. You'll see at your table you have a piece of wire. And now to your question, do you teach this lessons all at once or teach them step by step? Demonstrating to do the figure in wire, I usually will do one figure step by step with the kids and then let them do their second one on their own, because they're going to be doing two. They'll have two pieces of wire. Now, it's up to you if you want to just demonstrate and let them go on their own. If you have a lot of helpers that can walk around and help the kids, that might be fine too. Another way, if you want to show the video of just the project, that can be helpful too. It's kind of hard to see, like if you're demonstrating in the front of the classroom with a little wire, it's a little hard for kids to see sometimes what exactly that you're doing. So I will, here, let's.
Make an action figure using wire. Note, this is a step-by-step lesson.
So that's what they
Guide
mean by
students
step-by-step.
through this project until the basic figures are formed.
All right, so would you guys rather watch the video, or do you think you can see? You can see? Okay. So what they're going to start out by doing is fold the wire in half so it's fairly even. Then you're going to make a loop at the top, I would say about 1.5 inches. And then you're going to twist the wires together, maybe like 3 or 4 times. And that's going to make the head and the neck of the figure. Then you're going to take one of the wires and bend it up to make a loop. And the loop is probably going to be about 2 inches long, about the length of maybe their pinky. Then you're going to twist the end of the wire around the middle just to secure it. And that's going to be one arm. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Then this point is a little bit tricky because sometimes the kids, what you want to do is you want to take the longer wire and do the same thing to make the second arm. Sometimes the kids will take the shorter one and then they end up with one wire and then they're like, what did I do? So do the same thing with this longer wire, a loop about 2 inches. Wrap that around the center, and then you've got the 2 arms. Then you're going to take the 2 wires, twist them down the middle to make the torso. All right, and then you take the ends of these wires, bend them up to the torso, and wrap the end of the wire around the torso. So you have basically 2 loops that'll be the legs. So then you're going to take the arms and the legs and twist them. Yes. They're going on a diet. And then they twist them almost to the end. You'll have a little loop at the end, which will be the hands and the feet. Some kids get this right away, and some kids will really struggle with the first one. But usually, by the time you get the first one, bless you, the second one is really easy. So, bless you. It doesn't matter if your figure's not perfectly in proportion. Actually, because it's going to be doing an activity, you might think about what activity it's doing. If they're going to be playing basketball, for example, the arms might want to be a little bit longer so that they can be reaching up and holding a ball. Because the next step that they're going to be doing is they're going to be using pipe cleaners. And they're going to be creating clothing, hair, accessories, whatever they want to go with their figure. So if they're going to make clothing, they can just use the pipe cleaners and wrap around however they want. If they're going to make hair, they can wrap it around the top. They can make a bun on the top. If they want to make a ball or accessories with pipe cleaners, they can do that as well. So they'll have 2 figures, and then they're going to, or you can figure out how you want to display these. So you don't get anything in your kit to mount them on. You can use construction paper, although it's a little bit flimsy. What I usually use is a little heavier cardstock. Now I cut mine actually in a variety of sizes. So I'll have some that are this size, some that are longer and skinnier, because some kids might want to. So for example, if they want to create something like a road or sometimes they can do, I've had a kid do a basketball court, so that's long and narrow, so they'll fold one end that's up like that. If they want to do something with a backdrop, they can take the cardstock and fold it in half and have a backdrop. So you can give them like scrap paper, you can give them pens, they can create whatever scene that they want to. If you want to give them a little bit of glitter, the glitter can get a little out of control, so you have to maybe monitor that a little bit, but it is super fun. They're fourth grade, so they should be a little more able to control themselves around the glitter. I had one student who did a rock climber, and it was so cool. She just did this, bent this, and then she took her figures, and she made these little handholds, and she attached them onto it was really cool. I've had kids do figures that are flying, so they'll, suspend with another scrap piece of wire or a pipe cleaner. One did a superhero and did a skyline with buildings, and then the superhero was flying over. It was really cool what they come up with. So it's super fun. Well, it is, it is pretty quick when you get it. The kids that are struggling with doing the wire figures, it does take a little bit longer. But it is one that you want to allow a little more time for if you're able to do that, because they do get into it. They can do it as simple as creating the two figures and just, attaching them if that's all you have time for. That's great. That's still a lot of fun. If they can create a lot of extra accessories, that's even better if you're able to. You can use like foam core if you want, which is this sticker, to mount them on, although the way that you're going to attach them is with a stapler, and I don't know, oh, here I have one. So have a lot of staplers available. What you're going to do is to attach them, you're going to catch the part that you want to attach to the background and staple it so that you have, oh, this is out of staples. Well, anyway, you get the idea. It's going to attach with a staple, and then you can bend it to be whatever position you want. So if you only want one foot attached, you'll have it stapled. And you can see it on this one. This keeps falling over, but you can see how it's like stapled by the foot in the wire. And then you can bend the wire and shape it as she goes. So they're very, very cute. They're a lot of fun. Some kids will even, so I'll make these like this, and so some kids might want to just use it like that. If they're doing a tennis court or a soccer field, they might use it just the way it is. Some kids might use instead of a backdrop, they'll make like a TV, and they'll make a little couch and have it be the front drop. So they're like playing video games, which is, of course, a favorite. So that's a really, really fun project, but as you can see, it's very hard to store. So you can put that at the end if you need to. Oh, if they want to do it on their own. Well, they can purchase these, these wires you can get at the art store, and they can purchase them on their own. There's a lot of things you can do with this wire. And actually, there's another project. It's on the fourth grade lesson, but it's not one of the regular curriculum. It's the Ruth Asawa lesson. I'll mention it at the very end, but it uses these same wires, and it's another fun one. All right, any questions about George Bellows? We good on that one? Okay. Let's go to Diebenkorn. All right, so this one is by an artist named Richard Diebenkorn. What do you guys think this is? What is it a painting of? Some of you might know if you've looked at the lesson, but abstract, okay, shapes. Any other ideas? Color wheel, okay, interesting. Any other ideas? It's actually a landscape. So kids will be very surprised by that. Yeah, it's a landscape. It's called Ocean Park 54. And I'll ask the kids, have you guys ever been in an airplane? And if you're in an airplane and you're looking down from an aerial perspective or a bird's eye view, your landscape doesn't look like what we think of as a traditional landscape, right? So it's going to look like very abstract. It's going to look like blocks of color, essentially, that you're looking down on from the sky. And they'll have some examples of different aerial perspective landscapes that they can also refer to. So this was one of a series. I want to say there were close to 200 in this series that he did of this one particular location, a park in Southern California near Santa Barbara. So it's a real location. But if you think about close to 200 paintings of the same park, like what would be different? Like how would he change it up? The lighting, okay. So the time of day, for sure. What time of season? Yeah. Anything else? What about activity? Are there a lot of people around? Is it empty? How would that change? You know, some kids feel like this is the ocean and maybe this is the sand. It's not that literal, but no one's going to look at this and say, oh yeah, here's this, boardwalk and but you kind of, once you know the location, you can get the sense that maybe there's more activity happening here. Maybe this is where the people are congregated. And you can actually see there's some lines that look like, and some of them might be where he's made mistakes and he's just gone over it. And I think it's a good way to teach kids. You just incorporate it into your artwork. A mistake doesn't have to be, a drama. You can just incorporate it. How do you make it work for you in your piece?
Or it could be property lines.
Could be, yeah, it could be. And it could be, how we talked about the diagonal lines give you that sense of movement. Maybe he's conveying that sense of movement with those lines or some of the swirling lines. Right. So it's an interesting point of view to think about because, like we tend to assume a landscape is going to be one particular way, and it's not always the case. Well, and also with this one, an important thing to talk about is the mood. So when you think about these colors, we talked about in this one, complementary or contrasting colors. But in this one, we see a lot of colors that are very similar in value. Yeah. Some are kind of complementary, but they're very similar in that they're sort of dulled down. They're a little bit similar value. A lot of colors up here that are analogous, so closer to each other on the color wheel. So different shades of blues and blue purples. So it's a very different mood, I think. And, everybody's opinion is different than the drama that was in the Dali. This is more calm and peaceful and soothing. All right, so that's Diebenkorn. And then they're going to be sketching so they can think about a place that they might know of. It could be an imaginary place. It could be a real location. And it's very, very abstract. So they're not going to sit here and draw houses or, people. Or you can ask them, if you want to include houses and people, how is it going to look when you're from an aerial perspective? So you're not going to see a roof line in the house. What is it going to look like looking down on it? A person or a tree, it might not look like maybe it looks like a circle, or maybe it's just sort of a concentration. Maybe like in that one, we noticed there was more squares in one section. Maybe it's just more concentrated shapes in one area where there's more activity happening. So think about, some place that you might know of. It doesn't all have to be straight vertical and horizontal lines if you want to do some curving lines. Some kids will be very literal. They want to do a baseball field, or something, and they'll draw. But that's fine. They can think about from an aerial perspective. You'll see the diamond. You'll see a big section with the grass. You might see something with the stands. Like, how are you going to convey that from an aerial perspective? All right, and then they're going to be using, in this one, watercolors again. This is another watercolor lesson. This time they're going to have watercolor paper that they're going to paint on. It's a little bit heavier. This paper, some watercolor paper has a very distinct rough side and smooth side. This one really doesn't. They both seem fairly smooth. But if yours does, the rough side is typically what you will paint on. It has a little more tooth for the watercolor. So they'll put their name on it. This one they're going to be learning a couple of different techniques. So they'll start out first with their oil pastels again. Let me see, are you guys doing this one? No, this one I'm just demonstrating, so I'll just show you this one. Start out with the oil pastels. Think about a landscape, very abstract. You know, they can use different colors. I'm thinking about maybe the playground at my school. So this is kind of a grassy area. This has tan bark. This has some play structures, so it's a little bit busier. So maybe I'll make some more shapes. There's a garden over here. And then we've got the blacktop area. All right, so I've got my basic shapes in. Then they're going to be using their watercolors. And this time they're going to do 3 different techniques. 2 techniques they know and 1 technique that's new for them. So they know flat wash, and that's basically just solid block of one color painted evenly. We just did graded wash in the Salvador Dali, so that's going from dark to light. You can review with them how to do it. You know, just add water a little bit at a time until you get lighter. The last one, which is new for them, is the variegated wash. So that one is starting with your clear water. You're going to, whoops, sort of clear water. You're going to paint your paper first. So you'll start with wet background, and then you'll add your wet watercolors on top of it. Now mine's going to drip, just so you know, because I'm holding it vertically, but theirs will be flat. And you're going to paint 2 or more colors, and you can watch and see how they'll react with each other. That's fine, it's dripping. But they can really see how the wet paper makes the colors kind of spread and blend. And it might be an area where you want that effect. You know, are you doing a sunset in your background and you want to do a sunset blend? Are you doing the ocean and you want to blend a variety of colors?
What's this stuff called?
Variegated, yeah. I can put that one up too, so that has the name of it on there. So they'll pick, and they can do some sections that have the variegated wash, some sections that just have like a graded wash, some sections that may just have the flat wash where it's all one color. The oil pastels will give it a little bit of resistance, but they should still try to paint away from a section that's really wet. So if I've just painted this one and I don't want my colors to bleed, I might go to another one that's not touching, let it dry for a minute or so, and then come back to it. So this is actually a very, very fast project. If you only have a short class time to work with, this is a good one to do. But they're actually really interesting. I really like that project, and it's a good way to learn some watercolor techniques. All right, any questions on that one? You good? Okay. Yeah, that one, it's really easy. It's a nice, fast lesson. Okay, this one, Pablo Picasso. So most kids will have heard of Pablo Picasso before. And this one, let's see, it's called Weeping Woman. So this is actually a portrait of a friend of his. Her name was Dora Maar. She had found out, I guess, her father was very ill, and so she's, you know, having some strong emotions. What emotions do you see? What do you think she's feeling? Crying. Yeah, we can see that there's kind of like teardrops coming down here. Worried. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, all those emotions. Good. So Pablo Picasso became most well known for his style of art called Cubism. So they've learned Picasso in second grade. They had a Picasso lesson, and so this is really revisiting Picasso and revisiting Cubism. Why do you think artists would paint in the Cubist style? A lot of people or kids will say, well, he probably didn't know how to paint, realistically. But actually, Pablo Picasso was a master at painting realistically, probably by the time he was 12 or 13 years old. It wasn't that he couldn't paint a realistic face. But by the time Picasso was living and by the time he painted this, let's see, this was painted in 1937, so cameras were around. They're probably a little more available. And artists started branching out. They wanted to not just depict reality, but be a little bit more innovative and creative in the way that they painted. So, one thought about Cubism is that they were trying to depict objects or things from multiple angles at the same time. So, and it's something that becomes apparent when we look at this face. If we think about the eyes, look like they're from a frontal view, but then we look at the mouth and it really kind of looks like it's from a profile, and it's almost like there's two faces combined. It's almost like a frontal and a profile view at the same time. So we mentioned a lot of the expression gives you the mood or the feeling of her emotions, but what about the colors? How do the colors affect? Very colorful, yeah. Do you feel like there's a lot of complementary colors? Yes. A lot of contrast? Yeah, we've got the yellow and purples next to each other. We've got the reds and the greens next to each other, blues and orange. Yeah, so it's really a lot of complementary colors that he's used next to each other, and that really creates that strong kind of jarring contrast. And he's also left this black and white in the middle. So it's really kind of interesting. If is he trying to get you to focus on that section, or is he trying to get you to focus somewhere else and not on that? Yeah, it depends. Everybody's opinion is going to be a little bit different, but there's definitely strong emotion. Sometimes I'll ask kids, how would you feel if somebody painted your portrait and this is what they gave you? And they're like, oh, I'd be very upset. And it's like, well, what if I told you his work sells for hundreds of millions of dollars? Oh, I'd be fine with it. Yeah, so he's a very interesting artist and personality. Yeah, it's like it's calling to you almost, yeah. All right, so this one, they're not actually going to be using their sketchbook. They're going to be doing what's called a charcoal transfer. I can't remember if they've done this in third grade. I don't think so. I think this is the first time they've done a charcoal transfer. So they'll have a loose piece of sketch paper. And, in all of our grade levels, there's always a face, how to draw a face lesson, or some sort of a portrait. Sometimes it's a self-portrait or a portrait lesson. This is actually a new handout for this class, or for this lesson. It shows not only how to draw a face in frontal view, but it shows you from the profile view. So it's a good one to print out and have on hand for the kids. It'll show you how to do some features in profile, because what they're going to be doing is a face that's a combination of a frontal and profile view. So you should have in your next piece, let's see, a piece of, you have sketch paper and a white paper? Yeah, okay. And then in your box you should have charcoal, the little toolbox. There should be a couple pieces of charcoal. It just looks like a very small piece of burnt stick, which is what it is. All right. Did you find a charcoal? Yeah, it can be very, very small. It doesn't have to be a large piece. All right, so on your sketch paper, what you're going to do is, let me put the handout up here so you can see it. Follow along. And they'll be very familiar with the first step if they've been doing art in action. So they're going to be drawing a face with an oval. Like usual, if they want to warm up by air drawing, they can air draw their face. And then they're just going to put in an oval. Now, because they're doing a transfer, they're going to need to draw fairly dark with their charcoal. And they don't have to draw dark to start out with if they don't want to. If they want to draw lightly and then go over the areas that they want to transfer. That way, if they make a mistake, they can stop. Yeah.
Filling the page?
Yes, yes, very large. Yes, because they're going to paint this in afterwards. All right, then they're going to put a line down the middle that's a person's face in profile. So they'll have the forehead, a nose, a mouth, and the chin. So you're going to have one side of the face that's a profile and one side of the face that's a frontal view. So they'll put the features in, and now your features do not have to be realistic, right? So this is a Cubist portrait, so we're not concerned with the proportions necessarily, putting the eyes directly on the vertical or the horizontal middle axis. They can put them wherever they want. So if the eyes are going to be on a frontal view, you'll see them that way. Eyes from a profile view, maybe this eye is going to be up here, will look a little bit different. You know, they can put in some details if they want. Now, they don't have to put in a lot of details on their charcoal transfer because they are going to paint over this. But when they've got a few things in, they can darken up the areas that they want to transfer. And this can be hard for the kids to do dark enough, which is strange because when they draw with their pencil, it's always really dark, and then they go to the charcoal and they'll draw very lightly. So just have them darken it up. And then they're going to they'll have a 9x12 sheet of white. They'll take their sketch paper, and you guys can do it when you're ready. You can transfer yours as well. They'll take it face down. Just rub lightly over the charcoal and then lift this up. You can kind of lift up a corner of it and see if it looks like it's transferred, and then before you lift the whole thing. And you'll notice when you transfer, it's the image in reverse. So just make sure the kids are aware, if they really want it to be facing one direction or the other, that it's the reverse. So again, talking about like how do you remind the kids step by step. Okay, here's your sketch with charcoal. Then you're going to transfer your charcoal. So, okay, here's your 2 steps. Now, when they've got it on their final paper, they're going to come back with oil pastels and outline. So just really darken up. They don't have to only use black. They can use whatever colors they want. Now again, this is now I'm switched to the oil pastels. And again, they're not going to do too much detail at this point because they are still going to be painting. All right, so when they've got to this point, they've outlined it with oil pastels, excuse me. Now they're going to paint in with tempera.
So what's the purpose of doing the charcoal first and then doing oil pastels?
That's a good question. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that it's getting them in the practice of using that technique.
Okay.
Not so much for this lesson, but for some of the others that they'll do the same technique for. There's one in particular I remember in 5th grade where they do a transfer with the Audubon, the birds, and it's so that oftentimes kids will do a really dark outline around things. Like if they're drawing a bird, you wouldn't see it in nature with a dark outline, but it gives them enough of a guide of where they can color and how to draw their figure. I don't really know exactly why we do it in this one other than it's kind of a cool technique, something different.
Yeah, okay.
All right, and then you'll have your tempera paints. So this one is still the oil pastels, so it's still this one. Yeah, we haven't got, I said chalk pastels at one point, but I misspoke. It's the oil pastels. We'll get to those in a minute. But so you're going to outline these with the oil pastels. It's the box that looks like this. Whatever color you want to use.
Any color?
Yeah. You can use multiple colors if you like. All right, so when you're painting with tempera, your tempera brush is the one with the firmer bristles. Let me find mine. It's the brush that looks like this. You might have a couple sizes in your classroom, 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch. Does everybody have their, okay. All right, so then they're going to select colors to do their face. The idea is to get 2 complementary colors. So if they pick, yellow for one side, they can look and see what's the complementary color. They do purple for the other side, or they'd have to mix that themselves. When you're using the tempera paint, they don't need to put water first. You don't want your brush very wet. Just you can start right with the paint. I like to tell the kids to start with their lighter colors first. That way they don't have to wash their brush quite as often. But they'll come in and they'll paint. So you can paint yours, whatever colors you choose. Some kids don't want to do complementary colors, and that's okay. They can get creative if they want to. Now I'm painting in the face first because I want to also be able to let that dry a little bit, and I'm going to come back with oil pastels and add a few more details at the end once it dries. All right, so I've got my yellow. Now I'm going to have to mix my color for my complementary color. Show the kids how to clean and wash their brush between colors that they want to, wipe the brush on their side. They can dry it on a sponge or paper towel so it doesn't get too runny. You can remind them when they're mixing colors. If they're going to mix something with a dark and a light, say for example they're mixing yellow and red to make orange, just remind them that they want to start with a lot of the lighter color and just a little bit of the darker color. Otherwise it'll take forever to try to mix. All right, so I've mixed my purple. I'm going to paint that side. I painted my eyebrow away, but that's okay. I'm going to come back once it dries and add in a little more detail. All right, and then they can go in and they can add personal details. They want to add shoulders and a clothing. They can add hair. And this can be a combination of what they want to paint and what they want to use oil pastels for. If they want to paint in hair first, they can do that and then come back and add details with oil pastels. They can add patterns with paint as well as with oil pastels if they want to. And then they'll paint in the background. So let's pretend that my background has already dried and I want to come in with my oil pastel, and I'm going to add a few more. I'm going to add a few more details. Maybe I want to add something pattern in my background. And then you have your finished projects. All right. So they're really fun. Sometimes the kids don't like it. It's interesting. They're like, oh, yeah, it looks so weird, you know. Especially the ones that like to have a real pretty, you know, portrait of themselves. Like, oh. But I think it's a really fun one. All right, so keep going. What's that? Can you have those? Well, go back and try it on your own in your school. If you have extra materials, it's always a great idea to try the project ahead of time. Then you'll know what the pitfalls are going to be. You know, once the kids, I'll put them up here and you can. Yes. Well, an hour. Yeah, it should be pretty well dry by the end of the hour if they paint them. You're using the tempera. Yes, the tempera. Until it's dry. Yeah, I mean, you can a little bit, but not when it's really wet. So just let them know that you want to paint the skin or something that first, paint the face first so that you can come back and add those details. Hopefully it'll be dry enough. If it's not, and you have time at an end of another lesson where you can pull them out and they can just add some final details. Otherwise, they can kind of do what I was doing. You know, you can paint around some of the oil pastel details and try to let some of those things be in there. With the oil pastels, not the charcoal. The charcoal is just for doing the transfer. Yeah. All right, so keep going, get your faces all done, and you'll be able to bring that one back with you and have your masterpiece. Okay, let's see. Let's do the next one, and then maybe we'll take our break. Keep working on your faces here. This one I'm just going to demonstrate, so don't worry. You can keep going. Let's see. All right. So this one is kind of an interesting one. It's called The Figure 5 in Gold by an artist named Charles Demuth. And it's one of a series of paintings that the artist did as tributes to artists, friends of his. So this was based on a poem by the artist Carlos Williams. It's called The Great Figure. He did a number of tributes to different artists. Georgia O'Keeffe was one of them, which is another artist in our program. Can you tell what this is supposed to be? Good guess, good guess. Anything else? Any other ideas? Look at the colors. Fire engine, yeah, it's a fire truck, yeah. And so it was kind of, I think, based on a memory or a vision of a fire truck that was speeding away close to him, and it had the number 5 on the engine, and you can kind of get that sense of how the 5 is slowly diminishing in size, that this truck is going in the distance and going quite quickly. So he kind of painted in the Cubist style as well. You can see how his piece is really broken up into a lot of geometric shapes, similar to Picasso's work, although it looks quite different. But this one was also based on a poem. So in your downloads and resources, you'll have the poem that it was based on, and if you want to have one of the kids come up and read the poem, or you can read it to them and they can see how it relates. How do you get this feeling when you see this painting that's conveyed in the poem? It's moving, it's tense, there's a lot of noises, the sirens going, there's lights going, and how does the artist convey that sense in his painting? All right, so this one, the kids are going to be using oil pastels again, but there's a little bit of prep that has to happen with this one, and it might have been done already if you've been doing this program for a while. There are numbers that you'll get in your packet with your supplies that from 1 to 9 that you'll have to cut out on this cardstock. So not everybody needs 1 through 9. The kids are going to pick a number. So you might just have a few of each number available. So you might cut out 3 or 4 threes or whatever is the case. And then the kids are going to get a small square. It's a 9 by 9 square. They'll choose a number that they want to work with. Some kids will want to choose more than one number, and that's up to you if you have what you have available. And they're going to use this number and create a composition on this square. So they're going to be using oil pastels again. And they can turn, I've seen kids turn these numbers into actual objects. You know, maybe this will be a pair of eyes, or I've seen a child that did 2 sevens and it made a Golden Gate Bridge, or, you know, a 2 became 2 swans. You know, they're very creative on how they put it together. Or it can just be an abstract type of composition. So let's see, you can see the abstract ones look like what they've done up there on the samples. They'll be tracing around these templates, and again, it's with the oil pastels. So they'll trace around, they'll get their design. I can't really do this holding it upright, but I'll show you the final one. And then they're going to be coloring in nice and dark, heavily with their colors. So here's one example of colored in. And then it can go back and outline, if they like, where they want their shapes to be. You'll have rulers. The kids will have rulers, compasses, if you have that available, if they want to do circles in their composition. And then they're also going to write a poem to go with their piece. So that's kind of playing off the idea that this one was based on a poem. So it's something new for them. They haven't really done a lot of poetry writing. This part doesn't take that much time, but by the time they do both pieces. And you don't have to do it this way. You can do it however you want. This is what you'll get in your packet, is this square. So you can decide how you want them to do the poem. I just kind of cut a little piece and mount it on a background. But they can write it, certainly just write it on the back of their piece if you don't have an extra mounting paper or an extra strip. They can do that, you know, if the teacher's open to them doing it in class and you don't have enough time to do the project, that's another option. But yeah, it's really interesting to see what they write in their poems. They might resist, like some of them might not want to write a poem, but actually they can get kind of silly with it too, so it's fun for them. All right. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, you can look at their piece. It's really going to be inspired by what they've done. So if they have turned it into an animal, or if they turned it into a specific object, that's a good starting point. You know, just think of the object and what you can convey. It might just be the colors or the mood. Certainly the number that they chose. If they chose number 5, okay, what are some things that you might think of that if you want it to rhyme, what are some things that rhyme with 5 that you can put into your poem? And it doesn't have to rhyme, but you know, they can usually come up with a lot of creative things on their own. Let's see, should we do one more? All right, let's do one more and then we'll take a break. This one. Henri Matisse. He was a French artist and probably best known for his paper cutouts. You've probably seen a lot of the paper cutouts. This one's a little bit different piece. It's called Interior with Aubergine. Do you guys know what an aubergine is? Probably. Eggplants. Yeah, we can see there's eggplants here on the table. And this is an interior of a room. Does it look like any rooms that we usually think of? I mean, there are some things that we can tell us it's a room. It does look like there's sort of a floor and a wall. but not exactly. You know, I think this might be a doorway looking into another room. It's hard to tell. I think this is a window here, but there's quite a lot going on in this painting, right? A lot of pattern. This looks like it's a screen, like a freestanding screen behind, and then we can see part of the room behind it. Maybe this is a mantle here. But we can see several examples of still life also in this room. So this is an example of a still life, the eggplants, these jars and some pears it looks like here. A still life here, you know, with the flowers. It looks like something might be on this mantle. And then again, we've got another still life back in here.
That looks like a mirror.
This one here, it could be. Yeah, I was wondering. So maybe that's mirroring this. Yeah, it sort of looks like that. Like those kind of look like the eggplant. Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, I think you're right. But it is interesting. So he was associated with a group of artists called the Fauves, which were the term that meant wild beasts, literally, but it was kind of based on his wild colors and patterns, and that style was a little bit out there at the time. So this one, the kids are going to be creating their own room. And first they're going to start in their sketchbooks with thinking about some geometric and some organic shapes that they can create. So thinking about organic shapes, things that are inspired by nature. So it might be, you know, when you think about Matisse, he kind of has this sort of leaf shape versus something that's more regular or geometric shapes. So have the kids kind of play around with some designs that they want to possibly use in their project. The next step is they're going to be creating a stencil of their designs. So have these little squares. It's very similar to the 3rd grade African weaving project. Remember where they created their stencils? So they'll pick a geometric and an organic design that they like. They'll do the design on their stencil, and then they're going to cut it out. Oops. Now again, if they have a symmetrical or real regular design, they can fold the paper and cut it on the cut line and just open it up. If it's something like this where it's a little more irregular, they can cut from the edge, and then they can either repair it with Scotch tape and tape the edge together, or they can just hold it down as they're painting. All right, so they've cut out the stencil. Then they'll have their choice. They'll get a multicolor pack of background paper. And then for this part, you can either pre-mark the lines for the room for them, or they can draw it in themselves. So they'll have a template that will be a back wall of the room. So they'll trace around the template, or if you've pre-marked it, you'll have that rectangle, and then use a ruler to go from corner to corner. I'm not going to use a ruler because I can't hold it at the same time, but freehand it. So that'll be their room. So you have the side wall, the floor, and the back wall. And then they're going to take their stencil and they're going to sponge paint wallpaper for their room. So, let's see. And they'll use again the tempera paint, a slightly damp sponge. You don't want it to be too wet. But they'll go in from the edges. So they'll hold down their stencil, have them go in from the edges so it kind of seals up those edges. And if you remember from the the Africa placemat or weaving project, the stencils are a little bit tricky to use. I don't know if anyone has any great tips to share, but I find that they get paint on the back of their stencil, and then every time they use it, it like smears the paint everywhere. So I would say smaller designs work best and fewer. So, encourage them, maybe you're just going to do like 2 or 3 or 3 or 4. And so your design doesn't get too messy. And then so they'll have their organic design on one, their geometric design on one, and then they can do something on the floor if they want. They can choose one of those. They can trade with a friend if they want. And they'll have their background for the room. Then they're also going to be drawing and cutting out furniture for their room so you'll get a variety of patterned and colored paper that they can cut out little furniture pieces for their room. So when I'm demonstrating it, I'll usually have some pre-cut. So it's like, okay, here's your table, and they can place that in your room, your sofa, how you're going to place that in your room, and they'll add their elements. At the very end, they can get a black marker or colored markers if you want, and they can add in little details. So I find that this one's a little bit tricky for the kids to draw furniture in perspective. They don't necessarily have to worry about getting the perspective exactly correct. In 5th grade, they're going to go back and they're really going to learn the 1-point perspective of drawing a room. So if you think about your sofa, just put it on the back wall. You don't have to worry about drawing your sofa in 1-point perspective. Do the best you can. And they'll have a still life that they can create, so 1 or 2 still lifes that they'll put into their room. And you can see a few examples up there. This is not my favorite project, to be honest. I love Matisse and I love his paper cutout pieces. This one, I've never had one that turned out like, oh, that's amazing. It's always like, well, yeah, it's okay. It's fine. It's a good experience. I've tried to think about different ways to do it. If you make sponge stamps or something, or maybe the kids could do paper cutouts for the back wall. There's a lot of ways you can change it up and do variations. Yes, yeah. So pattern paper you'll get in your kit, as well as I think just different colored paper, so they can choose. If you have extra, and a lot of people will donate scrapbook paper in various patterns, or wrapping paper, or newspaper. Those are things to collect up over time. Yeah. Oh, Brock. Yeah. It was kind of similar. Yeah, that was more collage. It didn't have the painting with the stencil portion of it, but it was a still life collage. Yeah.
The part you don't like, is it the stencil part with the paint going, or the furniture?
I don't know. I think it's the whole thing. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I think it just becomes too much. And it is a lot in the painting, so it is pretty reflective of what you see in that painting. It's not that far off from his art, so it's not.
I can't imagine the kids doing a couch like that. That looks fantastic on your
I know. It's the shape.
Well,
and the lines, right? Make it like
they'll have the photos. I don't know that there's a couch picture that they can reference, but yeah, you'll have a variety. They can probably do a table pretty well. They can do a bed probably pretty easily. Bookshelf would be pretty easy. So they can encourage them to do simpler shapes if that's not something. You can just do a little stool, and that's a lot easier than a full couch. Yeah, I don't know whether it's that it just becomes too much, or the stencils usually look more like this. So like, this is what it will typically will come out to be looking like, and it's kind of like, oh, yeah, kind of looks a little messy. But it's the process, not the product, right? They get to.
to make their wallpaper.
Oh, yeah.
Decorate their own house. Look like that.
It's very realistic. So that's one that I always skip, because we can only do 10, so that's the one that I skip. But I don't want to bias you. You try it out and see how you like it. All right, let's do a quick break, and we'll come back just after 11, and then we'll get started on the second half. There's restrooms halfway down the hall, coffee, water in the kitchen. If you guys want anything. If you want to finish up, if you haven't finished your painting, you can do that too. Stretch your legs a little bit. you've got half an hour, you got to go. Yeah,
And you're talking.
Yeah.
And you're working, and it's hard for me. Maybe some
To do both at the same time. Yeah.
I've always had that problem, taking notes and listening at the same time.
Multitasking at two things. Yeah.
I don't, but some can. So
Yeah, I think, as you do it more, you just get
yeah.
used to it, and you realize you don't have to be perfect in your,
Right.
the kids don't expect
Right.
it to be
It's
perfect.
better for
And
me to know. It doesn't have to be.
yeah.
A horrible artist, and I find it almost better for the kids. Like I had to do the lesson last year for visual art where we did the horse
Uh-huh.
in third
Yeah.
grade.
Yeah.
My favorite that day. And the whole lesson we had watercolors and chalk.
A lot of mediums. Yeah.
A lot of mediums and kind of figure out the best order to do it. Because
Right.
you don't want to get kids into so used to. And if you could make the kids feel better about drawing a horse, because I was so like I'm circles, and they're like it wasn't great because they didn't feel like
They don't feel that pressure like, oh, I can't do that. Yeah.
oh I can.
Oh, I could do better than that. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, sometimes you do want them to aim like high. You want them to know that they can do it, because some will be able to do it. And but yeah, you don't want them to get discouraged that like, oh, I can't do it. Oh, thank you. It was a busy one, yeah. I've done it before where you don't cut out the horse, and I just do the horse on the final paper, and they watercolor right on it, just so it's not so much. But it actually is kind of fun for them to cut it out too. So I like, if you have time to do it that way.
And then we usually just hang out for
Honestly, people really, you're doing such a great job, like fitting in all of this.
Thank you.
into-
Well, we'll see about that. I
a
haven't
lot
fit
of
in all of it
input.
yet. We'll see. I know it's a lot. And don't feel like you have to like remember or take notes on everything. Most of it's all in the online videos. There's just, a few things maybe that I did personally that might have changed up, but yeah. Yes. It's great. Yeah. Yeah, so there is, and I'll talk about that at the end, but there is a Ruth Asala lesson. It's not specifically for 4th grade. I think it's more of a bundle, so they say like it's appropriate for 3rd through 5th or 3rd through whatever. So it's an optional one. The supplies aren't included with the kit. So if you wanted to do that lesson, you'd have to source the materials on your own.
Okay. So who do I feel like? Do I talk to art and action coordinator?
Yeah, if you really want to do that one. I love her too. And the project that they do is, you'll see it's with these wires, and it's kind of based on her crochet wire baskets. So it's a fun one.
Yeah.
The materials are a little pricey because the wires are a little expensive, but if you have extra in your budget, it could be a good one to use.
So you use what kind of wire? That kind of
The same wire that we use for the bellows. So you might even have extra if you've done it for years and they haven't used all their supplies. And there's one other thing that you have to source, and it's like a bangle bracelet that you can just get on Amazon. Those aren't too expensive. You get a big pack of them. that's how I was able to stay. Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, so. Well, that's what you're here for. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Yeah. Oh, everybody does that. Yeah. Everybody does that. Still, yeah. It's you still get scared. I did, everybody gets scared at the beginning, but usually I find that after a while, it's like you realize the kids aren't judging you. They're just happy. They're excited to have art. So it's like you start out on a good. As they get older, you find that, not as many people sign up and they get other jobs or whatever, they start. Oh, sure. Yeah. Any ones you want to take with you? Yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah, if you want to keep them in your. I just get so many after a while. It's like there's not really anything. But yeah, anything you want to keep, sure. Yeah. You can even just finish if you want. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started since we have a lot to still go through. Put this up as you guys get settled. All right. Let's get going. We have a few more to get through. So this is probably one of my, I said this about a few of them so far, but this is one of my favorites of the program as well. This is by an artist called Franz Marc. It's called Two Cats, Blue and Yellow, for, obvious reasons. What do you think these cats are doing? What's this guy? Was he sleeping? Okay, anything else? Any other ideas? Smelling something. This one looks like, he's maybe taking a bath. His legs kind of stuck up in the air. But this guy, take a look at where he's looking. Do you see something kind of happening over there? Yeah, he's got like a mouse or something crawling under this rug, maybe. Looks like there's a ball of yarn here too or something that maybe he's playing with. So coming back to looking at our complementary or contrasting colors, we've got a lot of examples of that in this painting as well. So we've got the blue and the yellow kind of opposite each other, a lot of reds and greens, creating that dynamic sense of movement. Also these diagonal lines creating kind of that action activity.
Yeah, these kind of swirls on the blue cat also.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what this, is really red here for, but it's really kind of repeated, this circular shape. It kind of ties the whole thing together and lets your eye move.
This one looks like it had already swallowed one of the.
It's kind of glowing in its stomach.
He's already in there.
Yeah, he's already in there. If we take a look out here in the distance, we've got this little house here. Why do you think the artist put that there?
Huh? Then it's outside.
Okay, it's outside, yeah. Creating a sense of balance. Yeah, good. Creating a sense of balance. Yeah, if it wasn't here, you wouldn't really get the sense that these cats are so close to you. You wouldn't necessarily know where they're located. They're very large in the painting. So this is a very self-explanatory. It's a very fun project for the kids to do. They're going to be drawing cats. So they're going to be going back to using their geometric shapes to create cats. Most people are very familiar with what cats look like, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a house cat. We see our typical house cat, but then we have our wild cats as well. So they can certainly choose, any type of cat. The leopard is very cool. I like to collect up pictures from old calendars. You can usually get them for free and just get them laminated, and they could be things that you can just have up in your classroom. I doubt that you'd be able to bring in live models, but that would be fun too to have. But yeah, anything that the kids can refer to give them some ideas and some inspiration. They're also going to be having, not their sketchbooks for this one, but they're going to be using this kitten picture. And I don't remember if you get it laminated or if you have to get it laminated in your kit. I'll try to find out that information. But this one wasn't laminated, so I just put it in a plastic bag. And you can do that too. And what the kids are just going to practice is with a marker or dry erase marker is just kind of blocking out the geometric shapes that they see. So that's going to be their starting point. So how are they going to, you know, just approach drawing a cat? So it's just the basic geometric shapes that they're putting in. And then they can think about, just like when we did our dolly, just like when they did the horse drawing, then coming in and doing the contour lines around it. So that's really a starting point for their drawing. All right, so it's kind of difficult. Like how do I draw a cat? I'm not really sure like how to start. So this will give them kind of that starting point. And there is also a new handout for this one. It's a really great handout. So if you don't have this printed out yet or you don't order the supplies from Art Neck, oh, not that one. We just looked at that one. It is How to Draw Cats, this one. So yeah, this handout is really helpful because it just shows you line drawings, but also puts those starting points of geometric shapes in for you. So cats are really interesting because they get into all these crazy positions and they're really flexible and can stretch. So they're going to get for this one a black, oh I already put it on here, a black sheet of 12 by 18. And they're going to be using a new material for this program, which is the chalk pastels. They've used this before if they've done the program in the past, and you guys probably know some of the challenges of chalk pastels. It's very, very messy. It kicks up a lot of dust, but it is very lovely, especially on a black paper. It's a nice bright colors. So they're going to be doing their cats, and they can start out with the geometric shapes if they're not sure how to draw the body. So I'm going to just draw some shapes. Now it doesn't look much like a cat, right? So I mean I've got my basic shapes going, and then I'm going to put in, okay, my contour lines, and then I'm going to come around, and maybe this is the, you know, body, and I've got my tail, and I can do some paws, and then I've got, okay, so it's starting to look a little more like a cat, right? You're shaping with your contour lines. I can kind of see, okay, I've got my contour lines, I've got the body of the cat going. All right, then they're going to continue to color in the cat. It does not have to be realistic. We saw blue cats. You know, that's not necessarily realistic. You can think about what kind of mood you might want to create. You can remind them with the chalk pastels, when you color one color on top of the other, you can blend really nicely with your finger, you know, to create some beautiful shades. And remind them when this starts kicking up all that dust, they don't want to blow, you know, the dust in their friend's face. Have them just tap it, you know, on the newspaper gently on their tables. Definitely cover your tables. If the kids have old t-shirts or smocks they can wear, this is a good one for that as well. And they can continue to blend. All right, so they color in their whole cat. They can put their cat in a background of some sort. So maybe this one's going to be sitting in the grass. Oops, I picked up the wrong thing. Add some texture. So if they want to create fur, maybe some of the fur is kind of sticking out of the body. They can even come back and highlight the contour line around the edge of the cat. Put in any cat details. So you want your whiskers, cat eyes, a little cat nose. You know, any features that you want to add in your cat. So here I'll have, you know, we'll go to my second step. Okay, here we see kind of the contour line, then here's colored in. I can add some more details. And then we get to the final one. And we've got the whole background kind of colored in, our whole cat colored in. And this is pretty much how I'll do it when I'm showing the kids. I'll start it. I'll have this one sort of done, so I don't have to color the whole thing. And then I have one that's the final one, so they see where they're headed. Now, if you don't want to put this up, if you feel like, oh, they're going to copy it, just don't put it out. You know, you can just show them, and then you can keep the pictures, the photos up, or whatever you want them to kind of have as an inspiration. But I like to have samples out just so that they have somewhere, they know where they're headed. And then when they finish, like I said, they can add highlights and shadows if they want, so they can come in and put shading on the bottoms. Where it would be in the shade. They can put highlights with a white or a yellow light color chalk pastel and do a little more dimension. With the chalk pastels, you're going to have to seal the pictures. So if you don't have a fixative, a special spray fixative, you can just use any aerosol hairspray. Any cheap one will work. Just hold it like 8 to 10 inches above. Just give it a quick spray all over. I'll wait till the kids are gone and I take it outside, and just because it does have an odor to it. And then even after they've been sprayed, I always store them with a slip sheet. You can be newspaper if you have extra scratch paper in between, because what will happen is they get chalk on the back. So if you don't spray the back, it gets on the other one in front, and then they get all messy. I guess you could spray the back if you really wanted to, but I just will store them like that. And on the black paper, if you don't use the labels, sometimes I'll use, if I don't use the pre-printed art in action labels, I'll sometimes put just a white plain label so it's easier to see the name. You can still see it with a sketch pencil, but you know, if you have bad eyes, then it's easier to see with a label on it. All right. So that is Franz Marc. That's a really lovely project. The kids really do a great job with it. Any questions on that one before we move on? No. Okay. And, oh, you guys are going to do the cats. I forgot. You guys are going to do the cats. You should have a black paper as your next one. So, oh, and you already started. Good. Perfect. So find your chalk pastels. Oh, some of you did it. Good. So find your chalk pastels. It looks like this is the cover, if yours are still in the box. And you can start out and draw a cat if you would like to use, I'll put this a little lower, if you want to use any of these as inspiration to draw a cat body. You can do that. Start with your geometric shapes if you like, and then do your contour. Color in your cat. The next step, to go from, so you're basically just going to be using your chalk pastels to color. Yeah, so you're going to outline the contour with the chalk pastels and then just go right into the coloring. so while you guys are working on that, I'm going to start talking about the next one, which is based on a very famous sculpture by Auguste Rodin, The Thinker. You might have, and I have, a different poster than this. It's actually showing from the front view, which is not a great view. The side view is actually much more interesting. But the kids are probably familiar with this, or some version that they've seen of this. And one thing about this, the Thinker sculpture, is there's not just one. There's multiple versions of the Thinker. And what Rodin did was he would create a mold of his sculpture. So, and then he would take the mold and it could be recast multiple times. So, you know, there kind of could be unlimited, I guess, as long as you keep the mold. But at some point, the French government, I put a limit on it, and I want to say they've said 12 versions would still be considered original. If it got too much beyond that, they wouldn't be considered originals anymore. But I will ask the kids, like, what is he thinking about? What do you think he's thinking of? Is it something light, like what am I going to have for lunch? Or do you think he's thinking about something pretty heavy and serious? This is the clay project. Yeah, I won't talk too much about it. Do all of you know whether you do clay or not? Or are you kind of, some don't, some do. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about it. It is a really fun one if you have the opportunity to do it. It's challenging for the fourth graders, and they need a little extra time, but they really love it. Most of the clay projects are favorites with the kids. But you can kind of see, like, he seems like he's pretty serious. He's got, like, the weight of the world on his mind, on his shoulders here. You know, his muscles are very tense. It looks like Rodin has emphasized his muscles and made them larger than normal. And why do you think he's not wearing any clothes? My kids think this is very funny, but you know, if you think about the time when this was sculpted, let's see, what was the year? 1880 in France. So they wouldn't necessarily be wearing the same type of clothing, the same styles that we wear today. And so if somebody were looking at it today and they were wearing old-fashioned clothing, they might not be able to relate to it as well. You know, it might just look old-fashioned to them. And whereas, you know, by not wearing any clothing, not only can he emphasize the muscles and the strength of his body, but also it makes it more timeless, you know, that people of any era can relate to this guy here. All right, so this is the clay lesson. If you do clay, there's many ways that you can do this one. So some people do clay that needs to be fired in a kiln, and they do the whole thing. You know, you make the clay, you fire it, you bring it back, you paint it, you fire it again, and do the whole process. Some people will do clay, like for example, this one looks like it was done out of clay that's fired in a kiln, but they didn't do the painting process. So it's like they would just bring it and they would just fire it maybe one time and leave it as the white. This is one that's done, you know, with the whole process, right? So this was fired in the kiln. The kids come back and paint with the glaze. It goes back into the kiln a second time. So if you don't have a kiln at your school, it's a little bit of a you know, process to kind of figure out how that happens, but it's definitely worth doing if you're able to. What the kids will get is a lump of clay, 2 lumps of clay actually, and I call it the hot dog and the French fry. So it's like one piece that's a little bigger and one that's a skinny piece. And what the kids will do is they shape the bigger piece into like a bowling pin. The French fry goes attached to the back of the bowling pin and it becomes the arms. So it like gets stuck on the back of this person and it becomes the arms. Then you cut the bowling pin in half and those become the 2 legs. And then they shape it from there. So they'll pinch the head and they smooth it out and then they pose it in whatever pose they want. It's a lot easier to do a sitting figure than a standing figure. The balance is a little bit challenging on a standing figure, but you'll see that they have to make the legs shorter than normal. It's kind of out of proportion. But they can do it, you know, it's certainly doable. And they can also incorporate, so like you can't put certain things in the kiln, right? It just has to be the clay. So, but if they wanted to, like this guy wanted to do a bow staff. So you can have them make holes in their figure. You can have them pose the hands in a certain way that you can attach an item later on to that. So there's many ways. You can also do air dry oven baked clay with this if you don't have the opportunity to put those in a kiln. And again, if you want to come to the clay training, that is definitely a worthwhile one if you do a lot of clay. All right, let's move on to Diego Rivera. Any questions on the clay? There's a lot involved with clay, so definitely, hopefully you have a person that is a clay person at your school, can maybe help out with some of that. If not, it's a great learning experience. I didn't know anything about clay, and now I do clay for the whole school, and it's not that bad. All right, so this project is by Diego Rivera. He was an artist born in Mexico and married to another very well-known artist, Frida Kahlo. The kids will probably, if you tell, oh, she's the one that's always has the unibrow, they'll know exactly who that is. This is called the Zapotec civilization. So Diego Rivera was very involved with the politics, especially in Mexico. He was very concerned about the treatment of, some of the lower and working classes. And this was something that was painted as a mural. So I like to ask the kids, do you know what a mural is? They'll say, oh, it's painted, something that's painted on a wall. They'll usually kind of have an idea. And this is painted on a wall. It's a very, very large mural. This is just one panel or one section of it. Why do you think an artist might paint a mural versus paint a painting on a canvas?
To express to the world what he wants to express.
Yeah, and it's a lot more accessible, right? If it's in a mural, you don't have to pay money and go into a museum and, get admission. It's just out there. Anyone who passes by can see it. And yeah, part of the community, definitely. So this was an ancient Mexican civilization that he depicted here, and we can see there's many people doing a variety of tasks. It looks like there's artisans here. These people are preparing for a special ceremony. Here in the background, we've got people hunting and fishing in the river here. And then we've even got these panels down here that look like they were carved, but they're actually painted. But they do look like they were carved out of stone. It just has that look of some other figures. And what kind of story do you think he was trying to tell? Do you think he was trying to convey any social commentary? What do you think? Any ideas? Like he's showing a civilization of people with all different types of jobs and how they're all contributing, right? Everybody's contributing to this civilization, whether you're a hunter or fisherman, whether you're a priest, whether you're a chef, whether you're an artist. It's not like no hierarchy of who's more important than the other. They're all making their contribution, and it looks like they're fairly peacefully working together without a lot of conflict. So it could be, the ancient civilizations were able to achieve, this harmony. Why are we not? It could be, I don't know, word for word, but that's just a thought of a message that he might have been trying to convey with some of his art. And this project is actually tied in really well with their curriculum in 4th grade. They're studying missions. So what they're going to be doing is a mission mural, in a sense. It's one of the only group projects that they'll have. And they don't have to work as a group because they're only going to take home their one piece, right? So, they can work. I like to divide it up as a group, but also tell them, make sure that your piece is a standalone, something that you're going to be able to bring home. Not, you don't want to have half like a cow or something on here that it doesn't work if you don't have every piece from it. But it's nice to be able to display it if you have an area where you can display it as a group project. You're going to get 12 by 18 sheets of tan paper. What I like to do is, if you have the materials, you can use bigger, if you have some larger this size paper, I like to create maybe some that have an archway at the top, so it kind of mimics some of the architecture that you would see in missions. So you might talk to the kids about what are some things that you associate with missions. The arch and bells or churches or some of the clothing that the people might wear. And they can draw scenes of everyday life or buildings in missions. So what I have the kids do, and you can, you don't have to do this at all, but I will have some examples of how they can work as a group. So if you have 4 people in your group, maybe you want to do this arrangement. You all have your one piece. If you have 5 people in your group, maybe you have one person who's responsible for doing the larger arch, and you have 4 that work together or 4 that work in this format. So I kind of give them these as suggestions, but they don't have to. They don't have to do this. But it's a nice way to kind of get them thinking about, oh, okay, I want all my things to fit together, and this is a way that I can get them to work together as a mural. You're going to have to do a little pre-prep with the paint on this one, because the paint has to be all mixed with brown. So if we look at down here in the setup directions, it tells you exactly the ratios, how much to add to each color with the brown to make these kind of muted shades. So you can do that in advance, but make sure you mix enough of it so that all the kids have the colors to work with. And if you run out, you want to be able to give them the same color to finish their project. So you're going to pre-mix the colors. Then they're going to draw their, whether it's a mission building, whether it's a scene from mission times on the tan paper. They might decide they want to unify their mural just with the background. Like every kid wants to do their own. They have a different idea. Oh, I want to do a mission. I want to do my mission too. Okay, everybody does their own mission, but maybe they unify it and just have a mountain range in the background that's continuous, and that's something that just ties them together. Or maybe it's just the color palette that ties them together, and that's fine, and they just work together in that way. And this one's a combination of oil pastels again and paint. So they can draw in, their mission building, whatever they choose to do. Maybe it's a bell tower. And they're drawing in. All right, so here's their mission building. And they'll draw in, I tell them usually the small details with the oil pastels, large details and large areas you want to cover with paint. So they come in, they've drawn it in with their oil pastels, then they can come in and paint in the large areas with the tempera paint. So again, it's the tempera paint that we've used, that you've pre-mixed, and you can see how these colors are dulled down, kind of that Spanish style color palette. And again, like we did with the Pablo Picasso, as the paint is drying, they can come back and add details with oil pastels on top where they want. So they can add figures, horses, animals, whatever they want to add, and then they'll put their pieces together as a mural. All right, so that is Rivera.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Those kind of figures that you did.
Oh, these things here? Uh-huh.
What are those for? Are those just to?
This is just to give kids ideas, if they're in a group, how they can put their pieces together. So if they're confused about how are we going to make a mural out of this, it's just an idea. And then certainly they don't necessarily need to have this. They can do their pieces, and then you can figure out afterwards how they're going to fit together, or, And if they want to just work by themselves, I give them that option too. If they just want to be on their own, they don't want to work with the group. But it is one of the few that we do work as a group, so it's kind of nice. Any other questions on Rivera? All right, and you might talk to your teacher ahead of time, like find out when they're actually doing the mission so that they have a little background coming into it. All right, Georgia O'Keeffe. So she is probably one of the most well-known female artists that we have in the program. And she did a lot of different styles, or a lot of different subjects, but she became probably most well-known for her paintings of flowers. Very inspired by nature. She lived in New Mexico for a lot of her life and painted the desert. You know, you've seen the skulls probably and some of the desert architecture that she's done. But why do you think many, many artists have painted flowers? What was special about the way she painted them that became popular?
Very close up.
Very close up, yeah, exactly. So like extreme close up. So you see a lot of detail. So that was unusual. Anything else that you guys notice?
Very bold.
Bold and the colors.
Inside color kind of give you a kind of very strange feeling though.
The inside color gives you a strange feeling.
Put a lot of detail in the inside.
A lot of detail, yeah, that if you were just passing by the flower, you wouldn't necessarily ever notice that all this was happening inside, right?
That color kind of like evil color.
Evil color, okay.
Very like a pretty look.
Oh, interesting, okay. I don't know if this is exaggerated at all or if this was actually the color that it was.
Very strange.
But yeah, she became, and also think about her perspective, like similarly to the Diebenkorn. She's looking at her flowers, a lot of them from the bird's eye view, like looking down into the middle. So that was also something very unusual. This one has kind of an interesting link if you go to the more about this artist section. I don't know if this is going to play or not. What was There's a
Grammarly
well,
does more than
I
catch
don't want to do
errors.
this ad.
With Grammarly, you can find really good, no, perfect words that make your writing
How
sharp
do we skip?
or
Oh, here.
explicit or
It just goes through a lot of her different paintings. So if you wanted to just have, you know, you don't need the music, it's a little bit sappy, but if you want to just have this on and the kids can see some of the different paintings that she's done, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, well, you may not want to talk about but yeah, her paintings were very feminine oriented. They're very soft and sensuous. Well, I won't play the whole thing, but that's the idea. Just as something different, if you wanted to have that in the background, you can always incorporate that. I don't know that either. Okay. Oops. I think I closed it accidentally. Live stream training. Okay, we're doing that. So yeah, so her flower paintings and her shell paintings are what we're going to have as the inspiration for this project. So they'll practice in their sketchbook if they want. Then they're going to be drawing, so oil pastels again. It's nice to, if you can tie this in, if you have an event at your school like a teacher appreciation or something where the kids bring flowers in and you have live, if you have flowers, or you can bring some in where the kids can look at flowers up close, or if you have photos that you can bring in, it's nice for them to have some inspiration. And they're going to think about drawing it from a very close up point of view. So even so close up that it's going to come off the page, right? So they can, you know, think about coming off on one side of the page. And they can draw flowers, they can draw shells if they want. There's going to be photos of shells as inspiration as well. So they'll just draw really, really large. Color in nice and dark. Again, put in some details. Then they're going to choose, I think I brought one that's a little more finished. They're going to choose a complementary or contrasting color that they can then paint in the background. Now, one thing I've done that's not in the directions, it's up to you if you want to try it. I've given the kids a little bit of baby oil and a Q-tip because the baby oil actually blends the oil pastels a lot nicer than your finger. I wouldn't do it more before 4th grade, but I think the 4th graders are old enough that they, you don't want a lot of it on there because it gets too goopy. But yeah, it just allows the colors to blend really nicely. So it's something to think about. It's not in your packet, but if you want to do that, you can. And then they're just going to come around with the contrasting or complementary color. They can paint. They can do a wash all the way over it, or if there's just a little bit of border showing, they can just come in and paint around it. So yeah, it's a really pretty one. They'll have a lot of variety of different flowers that they can choose from. And they don't have to do an aerial view if they want to do a side view. Some flowers, like what's that one called? Bird of Paradise. Some kids have done that. You can't, it's not very interesting from an aerial view. It's a lot more interesting from a side view. Yeah, so they can pick what point of view they want to draw it from. Or shells. If you have shells that you can bring in examples. A lot of people have shells just around. It's a good one to bring too. All right, that is, still 20 minutes? Okay, in good shape. Georgia O'Keeffe. All right, so this artist is Wayne Tebow. He is actually, as far as I know, still alive, living outside of Sacramento. There was recently, I think, a pretty big retrospective of his work. Very recently. And he was there. So he was once called by a critic the hungriest artist in America because he liked to paint food in particular and desserts especially. And he worked in different parts of times of his life. He worked as a lighting designer in the theater. He worked as a cartoonist. And he also worked in a restaurant. So we can see a lot of influences from all his different fields that he's worked in his paintings. So it seems kind of like an ordinary object to paint. And at first, a lot of his work was not very popular. Like, people just didn't get it. Like, why would you paint this? But, for him, it was something that he was very personally attracted to. He would go into diners, I think, when he was younger and maybe couldn't afford all the desserts. So it was something that he would look at and want to have one day. And then he also thought the frosting on a cake or the desserts reminded him a lot of the oil paints that he was using. So it was kind of a relationship in that way as well. So we can see here again a lot of repeated round shapes, carrying your eye through the painting. And we can see the cast shadows are a big part of what he does as well. And he was very aware that cast shadows are not just gray, but they would reflect some of the light of what the color of what the object was that they were reflecting. This is a little different version. A little different version of one that has some different foods in it. But it's kind of interesting how you see the different shapes of the objects that are in their shadows. So this one, the kids are going to be doing, they're painting food or desserts. Oh, one of his, I have this calendar here. One of his favorite artists was Richard Diebenkorn, and you can kind of see this. So this is a Tebow painting a landscape, but you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see a little bit of inspiration kind of from the Diebenkorn, this one here. Even though it's not so abstract, it really does have a inspiration or relationship. It's kind of interesting. So this one, the kids are going to be doing a dessert, and they're going to be doing this charcoal transfer technique again. So they're going to have a small piece of scratch paper. And are you doing this one? No, I'm just showing this one. Okay. And this one they're going to have to transfer 3 times because they want it, it's going to be repetitive. So part of his artwork was kind of the graphic appeal of that repetition. So here's some of the examples here. So when they do their charcoal, you want to make sure that they're doing it nice and dark again so that it transfers well, right? So because they're going to not just transfer it once. They can always go back and darken up the areas that they really want to transfer. All right, so mine's not that dark, but they're going to take this. Their final paper is going to be a white. Ah, oops. Oh, it's okay. I have tape on there. And they're going to transfer that. Smooth it out. Lift it up. Okay, it didn't transfer that well, so I might want to, before I transfer it a second time, I might want to darken it up. Go around where I want to transfer. And you don't have to make it very dark because you are going to paint this again. All right, so here's my second one and maybe my third one. And they can decide, do they want them straight in a line? Do they want them, diagonally? How do they want to place them on their paper? So make them nice and big, fill up the paper, get that graphic repetition. If they don't want to do a dessert, if they want to do, hamburgers or, some other food, that's fine too. But the idea, so some kids will ask, well, can I do 5 different things? Well, the idea is you want to get that repetitive, that graphicness. So if they want to do maybe 2 and make a pattern or something, they can certainly do that as well. And then you're going to have the thickened up paint. So just like you did, I think, in 3rd grade with the Van Gogh and the sunflowers, it's going to be mixed with that wheat rice flour. I don't have the container. It comes in a little box and it looks just like flour. It's like this fine powder here. And you just mix it with the regular white tempera paint. So you guys actually have that. So it doesn't say to do that. It says to demo that one. I don't know why you have that. Maybe I'm just showing you the paint. Oh, you guys were supposed to do the O'Keeffe. Oh, okay. We can still do that. Okay. With the flour. Why don't you guys want to do the flour? Or if you rather, we can do this one since you have this. Why don't we do that one instead? Why don't we do this one since you have this impasto? So we don't have to do the charcoal transfer. Why don't you just draw your dessert? Draw a dessert on there with you can use your oil pastels. You can use the charcoal to just draw it right on the white paper. You should have a white square. And you can use either the charcoal or the pencil. Just draw a dessert on there, and then we can practice painting with your impasto. Well, you have a pretty small piece, so you probably will only be able to fit one. If you want to do 3 small ones, you can try it. All right. And then when you have your desserts drawn, they'll have the white impasto, so the thickened up paint, and then they can mix with, you'll have magenta, turquoise, and yellow, I believe are the colors you get. Let's see. Red, turquoise, magenta. Oh, you get a lot of colors. Red, turquoise, magenta, yellow, blue, brown, white. You don't have all those colors on your palette, but you can experiment and mix it with the white so it's kind of a pastel. And use that thickened up paint anywhere where you think you want texture, because it'll give you kind of a bumpy surface if you were to feel it when it's dry. So I'm going to use that in my ice cream scoop. And then the other thing they can do with this one, if they want, is they can use the back of their paintbrush and they can use that to add in texture and lines in their paint. So they just flip their brush around and they can add in texture. All right. Then when they've got their desserts all painted in, they can add in like a table or a counter line. Paint in the background. So they can paint top and bottom, background, and when they've got their background painted in, then they're going to add in a cast shadow. So just like we saw in the painting, it will reflect, here's like one that has, it will reflect the shape of the actual object. So if they're doing a donut, they're going to have a more of a rounded shape. And depending on where their light is hitting, so this light is coming kind of from one side, so the shadow is going off to that side. If the light was coming from directly above, the shadow is going to look a lot different. So the shadow would be right underneath the object. You know, they can do it either way. I usually have them paint it second, paint the background first, and then come in and add the shadow on top of it. It'll blend a little bit with the background color because it won't be completely dry. But it's hard for them to kind of paint around the shadow. And if you want to tell them that the shadow is darkest, closest to the object, and then gradually gets lighter as it gets further away. It's a little hard to do with paint sometimes, but you can let them know if they want to create that effect. Okay, let's move on to our Grasserelli while you guys are painting that. All right, so this is a piece by Victor Vasarely. It's called Tridem K. And he was a pioneer of a style of art called op art. So what do you guys think op might stand for? Optical, yeah, absolutely. So most of his paintings were optical illusions of some sort. So they looked like they were moving, or they looked like they're three-dimensional. And most of his paintings were actually over 20 feet tall, so they were huge. They had to build a special museum in France to house them. And some people say that going into this museum and being surrounded by his paintings that look like they're moving back and forth is quite disturbing. You know, some people can't walk through. Here's another, example of one of his pieces. If you can imagine this, surrounded by these 20 feet tall and just moving in and out. It's kind of interesting. But with this one, I like to talk to kids about optical illusions. What is an optical illusion and how does that work? Our brain will retain an image an instant longer than our eyes, and so sometimes that creates this optical illusion. And I'll show them, this is give you an idea of just the scale of some of his paintings, as you're in this museum. They're just really, really big. And to think about, he was painting these in, I want to say 1930. This was done in 1968. He was born in 1908, so he started his op art paintings in about the 1930s. But you think about, like, now, if a child had good software on the computer, they could come up with this 3D look. But at that time, there was no computers. He was having to figure this all out mathematically, the size of how, all these figures would have to be painted to create this illusion. So I'll talk to the kids a lot about optical illusions, and I'll show them some things, like this one, for example, like how many legs does this elephant have? And it's hard to really see because the negative space is equally important in this as the positive space. And that's something that's quite true of op art in general. The negative space is just as important as the positive space. So if this wasn't on a black background, how would that change? Would it be as effective as an illusion if you didn't have some of these spaces that were, darker and look like they're receding? It would change your viewing experience of this quite a bit. So this one, the kids are going to be starting with, you're going to have this template of shapes to cut out. It's not too bad. They're all very simple shapes. Each child will need, they only really need one of these diamonds, but if you have two available, you can give them two and a cube. This one is kind of a time-consuming one because there's a couple of parts to it. But what they're going to start with is their cube, or their square, and they're going to draw them into cubes. So to put them into cubes, they're going to turn the square on a diagonal on their paper and trace around it. So I'm going to put it flat while I trace around it. Each cube is going to be made up of one square and two diamonds. So I have one square, and then I'm going to put two diamonds touching each other, and that will make it into the cube. So it's a little confusing. You just have to tell the kids, make sure you have one square and two diamonds for each cube. And they have to be touching. So if I have my one diamond, I'm not going to put this second diamond over here. The second diamond will have to be touching this other diamond to make it into the cube. So let me draw that. So they'll start with one kind of in the center, and then they can continue on, do as many cubes as they want or have time for. The next one, so if I put my next square here, for example, I have my square here, I have one diamond, but I need my second diamond touching to make that cube. So my next diamond is going to have to be here to make the full complete cube. Does that make sense?
It does.
Kids are kids are going to be confused a little bit, but once they get it, they get it. They might say, well, I don't know like where exactly to put it. So just make sure every cube has one square and two diamonds. Some kids will make it into a pattern. They'll make like a star shape or a particular figure. Some kids will just do random and then keep going. So there's not really a limit, and it's hard to count because sometimes they'll share a top. So if I were to put two diamonds here, that's going to be 3 cubes, but I only have 2 squares, right? See what I mean? So I'll put these diamonds here. I usually tell them at least 5, but it's not necessarily 5 squares, but it'll be 5 cubes. See what I mean? So like I'm putting these, the diamonds can be shared, right? And it was true of the original as well. You can't really, it's hard to count how many squares or cubes you really had. Sorry, I put the original down here. Here it is. But okay, so then let's say they've got their whole thing, their design all figured out. This one doesn't have very many drawn in, but then what they're going to do is they're going to paint in their shapes with watercolor. And I usually tell them try not to have 2 shapes of the same color touching next to each other if possible. If they want to do some that are black, that's fine too. They give you that kind of look of the negative space. Now when this one's wet, again, if I painted right next to it, it's probably going to bleed into the adjacent square. So I might let this one dry a little bit and then go over to another section and paint and then fill the whole thing. So eventually they're going to have their whole thing painted in. Right, so they'll have their whole shape painted, whatever they chose to do, and then they're going to cut this out. So the watercolor dries pretty quickly. Just tell them keep your brush fairly dry. You don't want it too runny. So they'll cut this out. They're going to glue it onto a black background and then come back with a ruler and a Sharpie and outline the lines. Now, if it's still too wet to do it the same day, that might be something that maybe they can do in the classroom or do at another point. Or if they don't have time to do the Sharpie and you have to forego that step, that's fine too. I think on the sample there's one that has the lines drawn in and one that doesn't. So you can kind of see the difference of what it looks like. So it's not that big of a deal, but it is a little more time consuming because they have to do multiple steps between the watercolor and the shapes and the gluing. But it's a really fun one. It's one that even if you don't have much artistic talent, you can get a really great result. All right, then real quick, we only have another minute or so before I got to get you guys out of here. This is not actually on the program, but one of you had expressed an interest in Ruth Asawa, so I just thought I'd mention this. This is put in the 4th grade lesson, but I think it's also in 5th grade. You can choose what level you want to teach this with. You won't get any of the supplies for this in your Art and Action supply kit. You would have to source the supplies yourself. It's the same wire that we use for the bellows, so if you have a lot of these left over, that might be something that you could do with those wires. Each student needs 6 of these wires though, so it's quite a lot. But you do have to buy these bangle bracelets. They kind of look like this bangle bracelet that you can get on Amazon. So that's the links for all the resources where you can purchase the materials if you're interested. It's what it is. It's a weaving wire project. Let's see if I find a photo of. And that's kind of what the final project looks like. They do a series of square knots down the wires and they make a little wire basket sculpture. And it's based on her wire sculptures. Actually, one is they have them in the lobby at the, what's the one in Golden Gate Park? The DeYoung, yes. And they have some of her wire sculptures there, so they may have seen it. And she's an interesting one to talk about because she did live in the Bay Area, and there's examples of her work throughout the Bay Area. One of the fountains in Ghirardelli was her design. A lot of her pieces were based on origami. And she, because she was of Japanese descent, she was in the internment camps during the war, and some really interesting details about her life. So we're at 12 o'clock. I don't want to make you guys stay over, but if there's any last questions, I'll be here cleaning up for a while, so feel free to come up and ask me any questions. If you have dirty water, you can just put dirty paintbrush and dirty water in the buckets. That would be great. And then the paint can just be tossed. If you want to spray your chalk, oh sure, yeah. If you want to spray your chalk piece before you go, I'll just leave the hairspray here, and you can just